Today we're going to talk about the health approach and how Cure Violence uses it. And we're going to do this together. And the importance of today, the idea of today, is not just that I'm speaking with you or we're speaking with you, but it's also about the fact that a lot of people don't know what we're talking about. And so this is the opportunity for you all to take this in as teachers. Does that make sense? So take this in not as learners, but in that you already know so much of this. But let's just take this in a little bit more deeply so that we can all be teachers of what the health approach means. And also what contagious means. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about more deeply understanding how violence comes to be and what why our method works. So the health approach essentially just means that we are using a method that is caring about people's health, which essentially means people's well-being. And that we're using an understanding of what is going on, in this case in the context of violence, but it could be HIV/AIDS, or it could be Ebola, or it could be many other problems. But we're using a set of methods that health people use. And these methods are methods that are based on not judging people. Understand what I'm saying? It's not about saying, okay, these are bad people who have AIDS, or these are bad people who have Ebola. This is understanding where it comes from. And in health, we use science, which means we understand things really deeply as to what's going on. And when we can tell people new things about what's going on inside them, or what's going on in the environment, then they're empowered to change. For example, in the early days of HIV/AIDS, not everybody knew that it was transmitted by sexual behaviors or by which sexual behaviors, and that it wasn't transmitted by others. But when people had that information, they could use that information for shifting their own behaviors. And also, of course, they would require certain skills. They would need certain skills. But there's other variables that have to do with contagious processes, that have to do with our friends. And this is the super invisible force behind a violent behavior, and it's also the force behind many behaviors, is that we're invisibly doing what we think our friends expect of us, and we don't even know it. This is an invisible force, just like microorganisms are an invisible force. It's an incredibly powerful force, and most of them don't know it. But people, you even saw it on the film, and many of you know it from your own lives. And so this one fellow said, well, this is all I saw. This is what my friends do, and we do what our friends do. And that's a powerful force. So what we're going to get more deeply into is, what does contagious mean? What does health mean? And how is this thing contagious? And then what it is to be a health worker, what it means to be a health worker. In my mind, all of you who are doing this work are health workers. I realize that there's certification issues and licensing issues, and in some places people are certified as such, and in other places not, or not yet. But you're doing exactly the work that other types of health workers do. So we're going to spend a little bit of time for reminding ourselves or knowing what a health worker is. And then later in the morning, we're going to talk about what are the special skills and powers that we use to help people change. And these are in a way, the methods of persuading people, which is interruption, and how behavior change happens, and how a whole norm changes, and what a norm means. And for one thing, a norm means what you think your friends expect of you. A norm is really kind of what you could easily call what everybody's doing. So it's a norm in this room right now to be sitting in a seat. Right? No one is standing up and no one is dancing on the table. So it's normative to be kind of quiet. That's norm. That's what everybody's doing. What's normal is what everybody's doing. If in your group everybody is shooting when certain insults happen, that's a norm. And in other places where someone insults somebody, nobody shoots, they have a different norm. Make sense? Mm-hmm. And also norms can change. Because as we've discussed before, I mean, I can't help noticing nobody's smoking. So it's a norm now to not smoke, whereas years ago, a third of the people here might be smoking. So norms can change. The whole behaviors of the whole group can change. And that's also what health workers put into being. So we're going to just go deeper on this stuff, and so we can understand it and discuss it as well. So again, this is about you taking this in a way in which you can just give this information to other people in your language, and we'll discuss how that language, what it is that works best. So I say that violence is a disease because it fits the definition. In other words, the definition of a disease, which I didn't make up, basically just says that it is a characteristic set of what we in medicine call signs and symptoms, but it just means, characteristics, and that are kind of characteristic. Like measles has this characteristic rash, and seizures have this characteristic set of behaviors that it looks like. And so violence has a characteristic set of ways that it looks that results in people being less than healthy, people being actually more likely to have a death, the worst health outcome, or some kind of disability, for example, an injury, or even feeling not so good. And those are actually disease characteristics. And so it fits the definition of disease, the medical definition of disease. Violence itself does. Now, so in other words, whatever we in society thought or knew about this issue in terms of it and thought about it before, we almost need to start over because of a new understanding of it. And some of that understanding of it is that it is actually realistically, scientifically demonstrated, shown over and over again to be contagious. So who can tell me what contagious means? Anyone? What does contagious mean?
Something that has the ability to spread from person to person.
It can spread from person to person. That's pretty good. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yes. Who has another way of saying it?
Something you can catch.
Sorry?
Something you can catch.
Something you can get.
Yes.
Get. Mm-hmm. From how?
Exposure.
Exposure is the key word. So you could have exposure in a lot of ways. You could have exposure sexual, you could have exposure to coughing in the air, you could have exposure to touching something, or in this case, as we'll see, it's really exposure to seeing it and it having been done to you. But contagious essentially is what you said. It just means that it causes more of itself. It spreads. So in the absence of being exposed to violence, people don't do it. And being exposed to it a real lot, like it's normal, it gets 100 to 1,000 times more likely that you would do it. So as you're exposed, as people are exposed to flu, they can then get flu, but not everybody gets flu, do they? Like if there were a couple people coughing here with flu or with a cold, some people would get it, right? But not everybody. Right? But the more coughing and the more exposure and the closer you would be sitting to that person, the more likely you would get it. Does that make sense, or do we already know that? And that's the case in families and in homes. For example, with Ebola, someone over there wouldn't get Ebola. So this is also the case with violence. It spreads, and the more you're exposed, the more likely you are to get it. And so it behaves like this. Exposure to cold, more likely to get a cold. Exposure to flu, more likely to get flu. Exposure to Ebola, more likely to get Ebola. Exposure to violence, more likely to get violence. How does that happen? How does it happen? How does that mysteriously happen? We didn't used to, by the way, know how some of these other contagious diseases happened either, because they were, what was going on there was invisible too, because we didn't even know about invisible microorganisms, right? We didn't even know. How did someone who coughed give it to somebody else? So this also has invisible forces, and we're going to talk about these invisible forces. And not everybody knows about this, but this is what's going on, and we have to figure out how to actually educate people, because as much as we may think this is hard to understand or hard to take in, it's actually what's happening according to our understanding of the brain. And this happens in street violence. It happens very rapidly, right? That's retaliation, how one event leads to another. But it also happens from growing up with people where violence was normal, right? That's what we see. But just to add that this is also happening in the family, it's also contagious. If you saw it when you were a kid, you're more likely to do it. If you're been abused as a child, you're more likely to abuse your own children. Now let's just stop right there. Why would someone who was abused as a child abuse their own child? Why would they do that?
Learn behavior.
Why would they do that? Learn behavior. How did they learn that?
From them being abused.
From them being abused. So what happened there? How did that work?
It set a standard for normalcy.
Copy.
You set a standard for normalcy, so you saw it as an expectation.
Exposure.
Exposure. Different ways of saying this. But if we were in the conventional sense of looking at good people and bad people, it wouldn't make sense. In fact, even rationally thinking, it doesn't make sense without understanding it in that way, because you'd say, why would you do that? You know how horrible it was for you. Why would you do that? It was horrible for you. Why would you do that to your own kid? You follow me? So it's like something happened. Something was, what would be the word? Something was transmitted. Something was transmitted to this person's brain so that when they got there, they did this. Not necessarily thinking consciously about the prior exposure, but they were affected. They were affected. In fact, it wasn't their fault. Also, by the way, it wasn't their fault. Now, knowing this, there might be a better opportunity to contain it within yourself, expecting it, or to be able to get help. Does that make sense? But otherwise, there is an expectation that there is a possibility. And suicide is also contagious. We know about this. People do it, and then other people get the idea and do it. Isn't that crazy? There's suicides, and then suddenly there's more of them, and then there's more of them, and then there's more of them. Or they're shooting in a theater, and then there's more of them, and then there's more of them, and then there's more of them. What's going on here? It's what? It's contagious. So this is scientifically outlined. This is the new science of violence. Not everybody knows this. People are thinking that people are doing this for some other idea, some moralistic idea. They're not realizing what is that's on it. So let's just go. We just talked about what contagious means. Let's just go on a bit and talk about how that happens. Does anybody have any questions about just what contagious means, what spread means? Kobe or Marcus or Tim, do you want to add anything to that? Is this common experience? Does everybody know this? Do people on the street know this? What is the thinking of this already? Is this already a given that it's contagious? Do we use the word contagious? You use it. How do people get it? Kobe, what do you have to say about this?
I mean, sometimes, could y'all hear me? Yeah, well, right, sometimes I say how people get it is, like growing up in the community I grew up in, and you know, people following you, your friends or whoever following you and doing what you do. So it's like, if a conflict occur or something like that, then I get mad at this certain individual. As soon as I get mad at him, my whole block mad at him, just because. So that's how, to me, how it spreads, just like that. Everybody ride with what their friends do. So his friend mad, so he mad. That's all I want to add to it.
So friends are doing it because other friends are doing it. Why are people doing things because their friends are doing it? Why would you do things because your friends are doing it?
Well, I know where I grew up in my neighborhood, it's conflicts that are passed down historically, right? And a lot of times young people come into a conflict and a beef and don't even know why, because it's just passed down historically. Like in my neighborhood, where one time the kids would play football together, then when they grow up and get in their teenage years, they're automatically in conflict with one another because this conflict has been passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation to generation. And at the end of it, when we talk to them, they don't even know why.
Okay. I mean, that's enough. I'm going to try and do these briefly so enough people have a chance to say something. But let me say that, so CVS and Walgreens have giant conflicts with each other. In fact, they both sell drugs. But they're not somehow doing this stuff. And then there's people in other neighborhoods who are, this neighbor in this neighborhood or this block and this block, they've hated each other forever, but they're not shooting each other. So the conflict itself, there's something about it. Conflict is part of everything. I mean, how many of you have already had a conflict today? You know, with someone in this building, or with someone in the hotel, or with your wife or husband, or on the phone. You know, and how many conflicts are happening all day long? But why would we shoot within a conflict, is what I'm saying. And someone said fear. Okay, we asked the question, why would you do something that your friend, just because your friend is doing it? Somebody said fear. Explain that. What's the fear of?
I don't think it's a fear of something. It's like if a person is in certain cultures or in our neighborhoods, if the person feels a little weak, they want to attach themselves to somebody that's stronger. So it's like they become a representative of the strength, just as a cheerleader type situation. So when they attach themselves to some type of strength, it's like now they give themselves some type of validation. So in that validation, it creates more validation in everybody else's head. Like, okay, well, if the strong one is gonna listen to this weak one, maybe it's worth something. Okay.
All right, let's hang on that for a minute. So, someone needs validation.
Yes.
That's really interesting. They need to be validated. Is that really important?
People want to be heard or appreciated for something.
Right. So, if they want to be validated by themselves, or they want to be validated by somebody else?
Or
The group.
person that they look up to.
Great. So, if they don't, or if they aren't validated, do they need to shoot in order to be validated?
Yes.
Yes. Right. That's interesting, isn't it? That's really powerful. So, there's a very powerful force. There's an idea, a thought, that I need to do this under pressure of if I don't do it, I'm not valid. And they would not think highly of me, right? And then what would happen?
They become the victims.
Well, maybe the group would give them a lot of discouragement and would look down on them. They could be criticized, right? How does it feel to be criticized?
Nobody likes it.
Nobody likes it. Does it hurt? So this business of needing approval of your friends, validation, and avoiding the disapproval of your friends, can that be considered a contagious force? Do you follow me? Now, let's just stay on there, let's just stay on it, because this is very central to what's going on. Maybe this is actually the most powerful thing that's going on, is to it in its contagiousness, that you have to do, you feel like you have to do what you think your friends expect of you, and you want to avoid doing what they might disapprove of or wouldn't validate you, right? So just let me say this for a while. So does that make things contagious so that everyone continues to do what the others are doing, and then they're going to do what the others are doing, and then they're going to do, then there's a new group of kids who are 13, and they have to do that in order to be validated, in order to not be invalidated. And does that sound like a contagious force itself? As it turns out, that's the most powerful thing going on. I'm going to show you this. That's the most powerful force in contagion going on that keeps this going. And it's also the most powerful thing that you use, that we use, to reverse it. Because you can give approval for other things, and you can let them off the hook for the need for approval. Does that make sense in what you do? Yeah. But this need for social approval goes all the way back to when we were on the savannah, and especially for teenagers. This is the force. So does anyone want to say anything more about that? And then I'm going to go on and show you actually how the brain is working this and making this happen. And this is the thing that we need to turn around.
Yes, I don't think everybody's contagious comes from the need to fit in with friends. It's not all about that, where we come from. You know, it's we speak about it all the time. It's the norm that we talk about, that we say shouldn't be happening in our neighborhoods. That's the norm that we're dealing with. So from 5 to 10 to 15, I said all the time, it's what they see, it's what we see. So it becomes something that we believe we're supposed to do. So it's not about me wanting to fit in with someone. It's the fact that if this is all I've ever seen in my life, everybody is doing it, I didn't adapt to it. I didn't believe that this is the way I'm supposed to live. So I'm not doing it because I want to fit in with him or her, or because they don't think I'm sure or not. It's because, guess what? From the time I walked out my apartment door in the projects, I saw guns, drugs, violence. So what else am I supposed to do?
Right, so I get your point. So there's two different possibilities here, or two different, possibly even parallel paths. And you're actually saying, no, it isn't about having to do what your friends expect of you, but you're seeing this all the time. So, and you're not even thinking about it. So you've somehow picked up, mysteriously, what is expected of you. Right? So you could even deny that you're doing this because what it's expected of you, or what your friends expect of you. You can even deny that because you might not even know that that's going on. But still, you're saying, you're picking it up from the observing of it going on, right? So is that the same or a little bit different? It's very close. It's close, right? It's whether it's Marcus and Kobe hanging together, or it's whether little Marcus looking up to his older brother, right? Is that pretty much, or what's going on in the neighborhood?
No, because there's no pressures. If you see your
there's no pressure.
older brother doing it, there's no pressures. There's not friends telling you or forcing
There you go.
It's just it's the fact that you automatically
I love that.
adapt to that.
Right, so it doesn't even need that in the first place. In the first place, it doesn't even need that. So let me show you how you're both right. Let me show you how you're both right. Because what we're going to do now is go to this. So how is violence caught? Anybody know? We've just been talking about it. Right? We've just been talking about it. How it's caught, and how it keeps going. So, what if we were to say that the brain had something to do with it? Is this funny? How is TB caught? How is a cold caught, by the way? How's cold caught?
Airborne.
Airborne. So it's in the air, so then what?
Bacteria.
Or a bacteria or a virus, right? And then what? Right, exposure, and then what? So now I'm exposed, then what? It comes within me, right? And then what happens when it's within me? By the way, how does it get in? You breathe it in, right? Through your nose or your mouth, right? Any other way?
You see it, you can go to the eyes.
Your hands, how about that? Not everybody knows that one. So that we as health people tell people, wash your hands. Why should I wash my hands? It's a cold. Because actually, someone who has a cold does this, and then you shake your hands, and then they do this. And that's really the common way. Who knew? Who knew? It's not obvious. But we as health workers can give people information. We can say wash your hands, or we can explain it. And then they would understand it, and then maybe they might wash their hands. And wash your hands is a new what? Behavior. But what I'm getting at here is what happens with that virus when it gets in? Whether it gets in through breathing or through rubbing your eye or your nose. What happens? It replicates. Who said that? Biologist. This is biology. Right? It's biology. So it replicates, it makes more of itself, and then it comes out to pass it to somebody else, and it goes in and makes more of itself to give it to somebody else. That's what's happening with violence. But it's not breathed in or by touch, it's by seeing it, and seeing it. Like this brother said, seeing it,
An experiment.
and it having been done to you. Make sense? And then maybe there's some accelerating factors if your friends are doing it that we got into that are a little tough to fully accept, but are really there and powerful. So if the cold is being processed by the mucosa, the lining of your nose and your mouth, maybe by your lungs, and then it replicates there, and then it produces more of it, and your intestines are taking in like cholera and making more of it. What organ is doing this for violence? Brain. How many of you have thought before that this is brain processing? The violence is processed by the brain. That exposure to violence is actually, invisibly, while you don't know it, while you're not thinking about it, while you're having nothing to do with it, your brain is processing having seen it over and over and over, and the more you see it, the more likely you are to do it automatically. And I mean, how many of you are, sitting here thinking about how the cold is replicating in your mouth and in your throat that you picked up yesterday? You're not thinking about it, it's just happening. You get me? So how? It is a good guess. And it turns out that observing it and being a victim of it predict that you would do it. And this is why neighborhoods that don't have it, don't have it. And neighborhoods that have it. That's the reason. The reason isn't because people are white or people are black. That's quite obvious, because it used to be that it was largely done by people who are Irish or Italian. Or in other countries, it's being done by people who are Israelis or Palestinian or Sunni or Shia, right? So if you don't have it, you don't have it. If you have it, you have more of it. And then you have more of it, and then you have more of it. Where there's no HIV, there isn't HIV. Someone brings it in, then there's more of it. Then more of it brings more of it. Make sense? So that's what's going on. So, yes, it is a result of observing and it happened to. So, and then, as it happens, it isn't just violence that gets picked up in this way. It's almost all of our behaviors. Is that amazing? In other words, we don't learn actually our behaviors in school. We learn other things in school. We learn behaviors in the school of life, which is observing what other people are doing. That's how I learned English. That's why I didn't suddenly grow up speaking Swahili or Sanskrit or something, or Hindi. I just picked up what other people were doing. I copied. That's why I'm using silverware instead of chopsticks. It's you pick up what is around you. This kid is not thinking about things. She's not really thinking things through. This makes no sense for the kid to be walking this way. Does it? It makes no sense, right? So now as it happens, there's actually circuits in your brain, did you know, that are copying circuits. They're imitation circuits. How many of you have heard of mirror neurons? A mirror neuron means that it does what it sees. It does what it sees. It's a mirror. And there's whole circuits for doing what is seen. And the more you see, the more you do. This is not just a saying. This is science. Now, I want to remind you all that you're teachers of what we're talking about now. So you're taking this in the way that you're being able to really explain that guess what, not everybody knows, but there are really circuits in the brain that cause you to imitate or copy, or what we call model what other people are doing. And that's a very good thing too, because the more you guys are good models, the more people will, even invisibly, without even trying, pick up who you are. It's pretty powerful and important thing to know, is it? Especially about being professional, how you speak, what you do. There's a friend of mine who's a neuroscientist who says that I have trouble not limping when I'm walking with my friend who's limping. Think about that. I've seen presidents of countries, who are all fixing their tie at exactly the same way at exactly the same time. Like invisibly imitating and copying each other. Watch these guys if they don't start doing the same thing. So, how do you think this happened? This kid thinking anything through yet? How does this happen? Give me a second here just to run through a little bit more of it into depth. These are complex circuits. So this has to do with what was said over here about seeing things a lot and doing what you're seeing. This isn't social pressure, which is what your point was. This wasn't social pressure. This was just passively picking up the stuff. Yes, as if it were normal, but also you didn't know that there were other people where it isn't normal. Did you know there were other neighborhoods where this doesn't happen? Did you know there's other neighborhoods where people, for example, aren't in gangs? Not that that's so bad, but shooting. Did I know that there were people somewhere who spoke French when I was growing up? That there were other languages? No, you only know what you see. You only know what you see, but you do what you see. So, this is in the social scientist world called social learning. How many of you have heard the phrase social learning? This has been known about for a long time, but what hasn't been known about is that this is the most powerful way of learning. It's the dominant way of learning. It isn't even just about for humans. It's for birds. It's for other primates. It's for rats. You ever see them following each other? Fish? You see them following each other? Is this guy thinking anything through here? Or does he understand what's going on here? Or are they imitating? So then the more of this, the more of this, the more of this. And this is doing what others do. Are you guys doing what other people do? No, not me. I'm an individual. Look at how I dressed today, by the way. Did anybody else think of this, or I think of this all by myself? Or am I doing what other people do? Or am I doing what is expected of me? Even more important. Do you get that? A lot of things I could be wearing today. Doing what others do. Unconscious, invisible, and that's what we reverse. And so there are pathways for this. They've been doing what other people, what a coincidence. That these guys look like this together. Is there a coincidence? It's scary how much imitating we're doing. Tattoos, they come out of nowhere, they suddenly lower pants, you name it. Certain type of suit, thinner tie. Oh my God, all these guys. Are they doing what other people do? Look at this, this is intelligent. How come none of you are dressed like this today?
You got the memo.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. This is funny. To me, maybe to you, maybe not. It's normal. That's normal. That's culture. Right? It's normal. Unconscious. Now, as it turns out, violence is copied more. Violence is copied more than just every behavior. You know why? Because it affects you more. It kind of really excites your emotion system. It arouses, it scares, it frightens, it takes your attention. It's more copied. And guess what? Everything that's copied is not for your own good. It may appear to be, but it isn't for your own good. And that's true of biology. Not everything that happens in the body, things get overdone. I mean, people have immune responses, you know what I mean, to take care of a cold, to take care of viruses. But some of those times, those go too far. And people get actually diseases from the immune system going too far. The brain can go too far. Some people, even who have a lot of opportunities and who have everything going right for themselves, let's say very rich people, they can be really, really, really worried about things that make no sense to be worried about. Because the brain is going too far. It can go too far. So violence can be of this nature. So, there are not only pathways for this copying, but pathways for this doing what your friends do. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit, but here's the result. Great, huh? And that's what you guys are interrupting. That's what you guys are changing the path, so people a little bit further back on the path can slow down or stay back, or don't jump. By giving them different perspectives, by cooling them down. And then we have to talk about the science of how that works. So have we taken something in yet? What have we taken in so far? What can we tell other people so far?
There's contagious going on. Violence is a disease and it's infectious.
How is it infectious?
Because if you see it, you replicate it, and it continues to replicate. If you have it in your community, it will continue to grow. If you don't have someone interrupting it early enough in the time.
How do people pick stuff up from each other? Easily. All right.
I
Now,
have a quick question,
yes, sir.
Dr. Slocum. So you stated earlier that in places where violence is not easily visible, there will be less violence to be expected. What about in this era that we are dealing with, the gaming era, such as Grand Theft Auto, when you just drive Grand Theft Auto, when you drive around and beat cops up and get points for it and shoot people in the face, and these games are perpetrated as normal, and some of these environments that you was talking about, little towns and stuff, and then these young men travel to the city and try to mimic some of these behaviors that they see in the game, and that's how some of them get shot, especially in Rochester. And they're not even from the inner city. There's a lot of shootings happening in Rochester that the victims are either from Gates, Greece, Henrietta, Fairport, and we wondering how these guys got to our city. So my question to you is, can the gaming, also the observation of violence through the game era, also be contagious to the individual?
So I'm going to take this, and then what I want to do, because of time, is get through a few other things that get us into health workers. But yeah, on the question of the games, it turns out that us meaning humans, we're able to separate context a little bit. And in other words, we know the difference between a game and real life. So it can stimulate some people and it causes more aggression, but the people in Japan are doing these video games all the time and they're not shooting. So let's just put that to the side for the minute and stay on the main point. Let me get through a few things that I want to get through so that we can get through the first part of this, and then have a little more discussion. Just let me get through a few more things, but make a note to yourself of what else you wanted to ask. Please make a note to yourself. This is what I do. I make a note to myself of the other things that I want to ask, so you don't lose it. You can retain your thought. Or writing it, especially. So, I wanted you to know something about another part of the brain, besides the part that just does copying. And that was the part that has to do with you really needing to conform to what your friends are doing. And I want to tell you that most people, if you ask them why they do something, they will not tell you that I'm doing this to get the approval of my friends and to avoid the disapproval of them. Any more than 200 years ago, if people were coughing, you would ask them, why am I coughing? Why are you coughing? And they would say, I have an invisible microorganism inside of me. They'll tell you something else that is more visible. Does that make sense? So, frankly, the focus groups do not tell you. You can validate their concerns. They'll tell you things that are important in their lives. Lack of jobs, not enough money, I didn't go to school, my dad wasn't around, all these things. They can tell you all kinds of things, the complaints of humanity. But they will not tell you, I was exposed to violence a lot, and I have these cortical neurons that copied. And I have to follow what my friends do because I'm in anticipation of their acceptance. And I'm really afraid of being disapproved of by them because the pain center in my brain goes off if they're going to disapprove of me. Have you heard that explanation, by the way, when talking to anybody? But have you heard the explanation, I got the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, it's resting in my macrophage intracellularly, and then it will replicate in the cytoplasm, and then, no. So what is actually happening is that there are two pathways of the brain, and learn as much about this as you want to of what I'm going to tell you, or not. But how many of you get really excited if you're going to have a pizza tonight, or you're really going to have a great meal, something that excitement that there's going to be a reward. At the end of this day, this is going to happen. There's a feeling that you get in anticipation. Yeah. How about, sorry to put this in the room, but for the guys or for the girls, you just met somebody new. It's really exciting to you. You're going to see them tonight. That kind of feeling, that's reward. It's anticipation of something to come to you. That same pathway for sex and for food is used by your friends saying, that was great, you're cool, that was so cool. And that's why, you know, it's really great for me when one of you guys are going like this. That's why if you say something and I go, that was great, you're right on. That is in your brain using the same pathway. Why? Because when we were on the savannah, we needed to do what our friends were doing in groups, to go out there and find stuff and do it together. And you know, we're doing this together, not separate. Now, so do you get what I just said? The approval of your friends, the anticipation, but at the same time, let's say someone here says something, and God, that was the dumbest thing I ever heard. You know, leave the room. How's that guy gonna feel? Can you feel that? All right, there's 3 of you throwing a ball. There's 3 of you throwing a ball, a football or something, or basketball. You start tossing it around, doing layups, tossing it around, and then suddenly 2 of them are like just playing with themselves and they completely ignore you. They're ignoring you. And you say, put the weapon down, go away. Get out of here. That shows up in the brain as pain. You do everything in your power to avoid that pain. That's social pain. Social pain shows up in the same place as physical pain. It's very powerful. Does that sound powerful? You can even treat it with Tylenol. So if I stick a pin in your arm, you have 2 parts of your brain light up. One that says, it's in my arm. And the other that says, this is awful. I can't stand this. This is awful. I can't stand it. And we know this. There's 2 parts. People have had strokes or something like that, and some people just know it's in their arm, but it doesn't really bother them. Some people, this is awful, but I don't know where it is. That part of your brain that is the same as physical pain shows up if you're going to be isolated from your friends. This is what is keeping social pressure going. You guys have just learned something that hardly anybody knows, but this is science. Health people need to know science to a certain amount because it helps you realize what's really going on with your patients or with your clients or with the people who you're trying to help. This person is invisibly, he's yelling and screaming and whatever, and he wants to do this and he wants to do that. And it's also in your mind that somehow or other you have to socially make it okay for him. Or he's not going to be isolated from his friends. Do you have a sense of that already in your daily work? That's what getting people off the hook is. So let's talk about this just a little bit, in case that, because this is a lot actually, to do a whole day on this. But social pressure, this is what keeps everybody doing what they want. That's why you guys are so good at diverting people, because you're giving them social approval to not do it. That's a different path, right? Otherwise they didn't have someone who gave them social approval to not do it. And you're dampening the social disapproval as well, or the power of it. Maybe by getting their friends to also be okay about it. There's more to it than that, but this is a part of it that you need to know. In other words, there's a real, you guys are like now getting to the point of being very highly educated health workers, understanding what you're really doing to another level, even though you already have the skills. And this will just make it even stronger. So let's take just a little bit on this, and then we'll go into health workers and so on. Yeah.
I just want to ask a question real quick. It's important to me. I understand and I appreciate everything you were saying about mirror neurons and emulating behavior and all this other stuff. You use the word unconscious. And we both know there's a difference between unconsciousness and subconsciousness. One is comatose and one is not fully aware of something, right?
Yeah.
And we dealing with people that we believe that could be helped. You know what I mean? I just don't think in the culture, the environment that I'm dealing with the individual where I'm at, that it's an unconscious thing, because a circuit can't move without energy. So they're not emulating anything unconsciously.
I get your point.
They're emulating the
Yeah.
subconscious.
Now, you've made a useful distinction.
Thank you.
They're not comatose.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
believe that's important, because you
No, you're-
pointed out some real.
I agree
good
with you.
facts.
I'm validating you.
Yes, sir.
But I could have taken more time and just said, let you say it. And you guys do this when you're doing interruptions. Like, to really hear it all the way, then, the person is even more comfortable. But I'm not just validating you to be nice. You're right. So I'm using the word a little bit loosely. But what I really meant by this is that it's not thought through. It's not a conscious, aware, as you use the word rightly, thinking process of picking this up. The person who is very angry, or the person who is doing violence, is not conscious of, it's not aware of, even though they're conscious and awake, not comatose, they're not consciously aware that they're doing this because it was copied, or right now that they're going to do violence because everybody does it here, as opposed to not everybody does it. And they're not conscious of the fact that they're very concerned at some level of what their friends would think. Yeah, they're angry. A lot of people are angry and don't shoot. We all know that. But they're not conscious of the fact that they're shooting because everybody's shooting. They haven't picked it up. And they're not conscious of the reality that if they didn't do it, they have some questions to ask, to answer. And why didn't you do it? There's an expectation. Why didn't you do it? You looked at your girlfriend, you didn't do anything? You slept with your girlfriend, you didn't do anything? He owes you money, you didn't do anything? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I believe this because dealing with this environment, when we look at the people that's being affected through this violence, then we understand the other side with the graveyards and the penitentiary. Because if somebody is unconsciously aware, how can you turn around and penalize them, and how can you have a cure? I just really believe in order to be more effectively, even with what you're saying, the word subconscious must be implemented. Because the most primitive part of the brain, as you know, is the R complex, the reptilian part of the brain. That's the first part. That's where the emotions come at. That's body language. That's when everything is perceived. There's still a pulse there.
Yeah.
So we need, so I'm feeling what you're saying. I'm following you.
And I'm following you too. And so then what you're talking about, which is another important part of this whole reality that you're all dealing with, is that when that reptilian, as it were, part of the brain, which we all have, which developed throughout evolution before these more complex parts, it can become dominant when we're really angry and crazy. And there's a balance between it and another part of the brain which, is set up to kind of cool it down. And we're not so good at cooling ourselves down when the reptilian part of the brain, especially if it's been traumatized, the emotion system has been traumatized, and that's why you as interrupters and you as outreach workers help cool people down. You as friends help cool your friends down, because you become that part of the brain for that other person's, emotion system. Right. So this is what's going on. These are the pieces of it. But just to back to that, what I'm saying is that we take this in when we give people, when we're helping people. Need to understand at a deeper level what's really going on in that person. And so the how we do our work will be the second part of what we're going to get to, I think, after a break, of how we help people. You know, people who are not washing their hands are not consciously not washing their hands, is all I'm saying. But we can heighten their awareness by giving them the information, and then by putting reminders out there. You know what I mean? Putting reminders, wash your hands. That may not work so well, but you know, if you say everybody's washing their hands, you go into the bathroom and you did something maybe you don't even think you need to wash your hands, but everybody's washing their hands when they're coming out of the bathroom, then you're kind of feeling, well, you know, this guy's going to think less of me if I don't wash my hands. I'll just go through the motions. You following that? This is happening all day in everyday life. Therefore, the information about knowing about washing hands is as important, as well as the reminders, friends telling you, and then also, you know, seeing what everybody else is doing and conforming, particularly to avoid disapproval. This disapproval is very powerful. I use it all the time, unconsciously. When I see someone smoke, I give them a little disapproval. It's not so nice, but it's actually sometimes of value. All right, so I'm looking at the time. Let me just check where we are, and then get me to a place of more natural breaking off, and then we'll come back and carry this a little bit further. Invisible is really what I mean. So these kids, they're fighting after school. Do they really want to fight? Or is it expected of them? They really want to fight, they can't even mad anymore, but it's expected, right? These guys, what's expected of them? Watch. This guy might be interrupting, but everyone's doing what's expected of them invisibly. Here. All right, so the last thing is there's a section of the brain that can be that responds to trauma. That's the section that you were referring to, the emotion system, the limbic system it's called. And if you've been exposed a lot, things happen to you that cause you to, what are you looking at me for? Be really high-strung, always looking around and thinking things are because of you. Someone pulls in front of you. He can't do that to me. It didn't have nothing to do with you. Just looking at his phone. Bad driver. Someone steps on your toe. Can't do that to me. It's all high-strung and thinking it has to do with me. That's from trauma. And that kind of accelerates the contagious nature, and then it goes on and on.
So the only thing I like to add is that, like, knowing that something is contagious helps you out a lot. I'm gonna give you an example. So I gave this example to Doc and Tim last week. So me and Kobe, just real quick story. When we were doing the peace tournament, and to give you an example of how stuff can spread, but when you know it can spread, then you can attack it real fast. So me and Kobe, we were organizing the peace tournament in New York City, and we were dealing with Isaiah Thomas. And so we had plenty of conference calls with Isaiah Thomas, and they weren't going so swell. And we were, about to pull the plug on him. We really want to do it, and we were getting upset. And what we were doing is transferring the way we felt about the calls in Isaiah to our colleagues in New York City that was kind of in the fold, Man Up and Brother Lance Furtado and everybody that was involved in that issue. And then me and Kobe, one day we were on the phone going back and forth, and we realized that we kind of had infected our brothers, whether they told us or not. Whether they told us anything or they said, oh yeah, when we see Isaiah, but it's like we thought about it. We said, you know what, we're putting out this energy. And so we had to reverse that and kind of, start putting out some positive stuff, because we didn't want everybody to come to the peace tournament and be looking at Isaiah sideways, and I think it's like that's the type of things that we deal with in the neighborhood with kids, or not even just kids, adults, and if you're aware of what you're doing, then you can treat it. And so I feel like we treated that situation right then. We realized that we were starting to spread some negative energy, which can, I didn't expect nobody to go shoot Isaiah at the tournament, but it's not just about shooting somebody, it's about a behavior that we transferred. And so that's what I learned from what Doc is saying, and just about knowing that things can spread so fast and then doing something about it. Because as the brother was saying over there, we do things subconsciously and don't pay attention to it. But when you learn something, you can pay attention to it. And that's what's good about this in here today, no matter how sleepy everyone looks. That's the good thing about this. When you learn something, you can apply it when the time is right, and you never know when that time will come. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, there was one perspective that I looked at, and that was trial and error. Me growing up, if I did something, I got a good response from it, I would do it again, and it become a habit. Trial and error is one of the way we learn. And so when you do something that's positive to reverse the disease, and you get a good response from it, or reward or something by someone pats you on the back, you'll start to do that more too. So that's one of the way we learn by modeling, but we also learn by trial and error.
Just to add to that, so what was really in Tim's thing is trial and error, but what was the outcome that made it feel that it's something I should do more of was, what was the word you used?
A good response.
A good response. What did we mean by, what is good response?
Feel good. Euphoria, like feel good.
Feel good. Were we talking about that in some way? It's approval. So, yeah, you try things, but and then you look for what? Whether it is approval or disapproval. You try things and you look when you're young from your mom, and by the time you're 8 or 9, you actually start to care less, about your parents' approval. You stay to their frustration, and you care more about your peers' approval. And to avoid their, so you trial and error, but what is the bottom line on trial and error? Approval and disapproval. This is not something that's going to be mentioned once today, or once in your training, or once in your discussions with other people. The business of approval and disapproval is the powerful set of forces that are keeping things going in a particular way, and from going, this is an approval track, this is a disapproval track. Looking for response. Response is approval or disapproval. Isn't money. I care more about approval and disapproval. And so then we're going into giving approval and disapproval for other things, for a new path. Does that make sense? Right now you get disapproval for smoking in this room. Before I was fine. Kobe?
I want to add nothing to that.
Does anybody else have something that's really burning?
Yeah,
We're going to be here the whole day, don't forget to.
we're
Yeah.
throwing around the word unconsciousness and
Say subconscious, yeah.
and subconsciousness. And I think another word that has to be in this equation is adaptation. Because when I don't need this, I think I can. What I've experienced with some of my people in my catchment area is that, oh, okay, I gotta get on the internet. Some of the kids do not.
Now be careful, because you could get some approval. So did you slow yourself down when you heard you were on the internet? And did
No,
have some?
I'm
You
checking
did?
my words up.
Did you?
No, really.
Oh, how many of you thought he did, but he didn't?
Adapting, and that's the word I want to throw out, adaptation. Because I noticed that even though some of the things that the young guys do in the neighborhood become the norm because they see it every day, also when I take them out of that environment and take them somewhere else, they adapt to that environment as well. And I noticed that when you put these same kid who was wilding out in his catchment area, in my catchment, you take them like to Tuxedo Ridge or somewhere, they start acting like the people in Tuxedo Ridge.
Why did they do that?
Because it's what
They're adapting, right?
They're adapting to
But
their
what are they
environment.
adapting to? What is the force to which they are adapting?
I'll let you figure that force part out.
No, let someone else.
I'm not trying to be flippant.
What are they adapting to? Anybody?
To what they see.
Wait. So many people. What are they adapting to?
into the environment.
Then what about that environment? Are they adapting? The norm of the environment, what are they adapting to?
In that environment.
What about it?
They're adapting to what they're seeing and experiencing in that environment. Another
What they're being
method
exposed to,
of
right?
seeking
Go ahead, what are they adapting to? They want, say it louder.
They want approval.
They want to fit in, right?
What is fitting in? It's what's approved of and what isn't disapproved of. That's the force. Did you know when you were making your brilliant comment of that people move and adapt, that what they were adapting to was what they were going to get approval for and what they were going to get disapproval for?
For sure.
Good.
And I've seen in a number of cases where I've taken this job fairs outside of their normal environments and what they do to seek approval, seek validation. And I think that's one of the things that we got to do a lot of, taking them away as much as we can.
You can take them away and then you bring them back.
And you have to bring them back, hopefully, and they'll start using some of that new stuff they learned back.
How
into their
powerful
lives.
is one person to change everything?
I think that we're very powerful.
That would be good.
That's why we do the job we do, because we're individuals doing the job. We're not doing it as a group, we're doing it as individuals. And individually, we have the impact, not as a group. Because everybody in my environment doesn't talk to me, they may talk to someone else on my team. So this individual effort that's being
So
adapted.
that's what we're going to be talking about later in this, after the break, is how we can begin to influence so that the whole environment is changed. We don't need to change everything about a culture. We're just trying to change the shooting within this culture. Would that be plenty? Right?
Can I say something just in close, because I think it's important also that it should be mentioned that there's outside forces that actually contribute to the environment. So there's no real, I don't see a difference between going downtown or the inner city. The people are all the same. There are outside forces that contribute to one side or the other as it relates to what people are adapting to. So, for example, if the drugs and the guns were poured more so in another area, you will see certain things played out versus what's happening in other environments. And so there's another play in this that I think needs to be thought about. It's not so much like the responsibility is not always on the environments. There's outside forces that contribute to that dictates some of those outcomes. And so that's what sometimes is out of our control. So when we see and we talk about the issue of violence in certain sectors, we see it seemingly like it's contained. It doesn't, even coming into Philadelphia, you can see it coming into Philadelphia, and depending on where we find ourselves, the environments are different. But I'm willing to also bet that the shootings and killings don't happen throughout the entire Philadelphia. And so there are areas that have been, I think, targeted by these outside sources to dictate those outcomes versus another environment. That's something I just want to, put into the equation. Thank you.
Well, you really have to make a choice. And it's a choice that we all make every single minute of our lives. And it's a choice to be either a creator or a victim. There's no perpetrator and victim. They're both victims. Our goal is to create a situation that is healthier by health workers and by using a health method. There are environmental factors that we can try to affect in various health situations. But guns aren't going into places where people don't want the guns. Where people want the guns because their friends think that they should have the guns, then there's a market.
Supply and demand?
Actually, most supply and demand is pretty much demand-driven. It's pretty demand-driven, whether it be drugs. There are very, very, very unusual situations on the planet where something can be eliminated where there isn't a demand, or where when there is a demand, people can't get it. And the demand is largely driven by whether you think your friends need it, whether your friends think that you need it. So I'm feeling right now that we need to really focus on why that behavior at that moment is happening, and why the people who are doing this behavior, whether it's in these neighborhoods in Philadelphia and Chicago and New York, or whether it's going on in Syria or South Africa or Honduras or Mexico, what's going on in these neighborhoods is if you go down to the real science on this, people are doing stuff most predictably based on whether they were exposed to it. Whether they were exposed to it. And even in the, I'll tell you this also, you may or may not know this one. Someone actually did the study of very, very, very difficult, challenged neighborhoods in Alabama. Housing projects, fathers not around, extraordinary poverty, the schools were lousy, all the things, et cetera, et cetera. And they looked at the kids who were in the range of 5 to 10, and whether they had been, according to them and according to their parents, whether they had seen violence or it had been done to them. 4 or 5 years later, they weren't doing it, those who had not seen it. Those who had it done to them or had seen a lot of it, 30 times more. And it was dose dependent. It was behaving the same way as flu. Or we used to talk about tuberculosis and crowding and nutrition and all of these things. We still do. Those are things important to be taken care of. But if there's no TB, there's no TB. If there's no AIDS, there's no AIDS. If there's no violence, those kids did not do violence. If there was a little bit, they were exposed to a little bit, then they did a little bit. If they're exposed to more, they did more. If they're exposed to even more, they did much more. This is the real variable of how contagious processes are occurring. And this is the variable that you guys are working on. This is what you have the possibility of reversing. And this is what some of you are reversing.